So I made you a nice little study recap paper. So these words, you need to understand what they all mean. So we've talked about them. So the midline is the height that would fall right in the middle. So the midline is always the height. And what should we always write if I'm asked for a midline in front of it? Y equals. And then we've talked about amplitude, which is the distance of spacing. Obviously, do you understand the distance to the top has to be the same as going to the bottom, right? It has to be equidistance. Okay, what's the relationship between the range numbers and the amplitude? The range numbers will be how far apart compared to the amplitude? The range will be what? It'll end up that the numbers will be twice as far apart as the amplitude, right? The period, we've talked about the period. So if I start on a point that looks like this, where do I get to that exact point again? Do you understand that this point and this point are not the same points? They're both on the midline, but that doesn't make them the same. Okay, because this is on a midline, but it's in a direction to go up. This is a midline to go down. So therefore, this point would start repeating there. Okay, and your pattern will always be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 points to get there, because it'll always be like a mid, high, mid, low, mid. And that's what starts repeating again. Okay, we've talked about the equation. So the amplitude is this number in front changes the amplitude. And we talked about this value at the end changing the midline. And then we talked about a multiplier in this position, and it changes the period of a graph, and it follows this. 2 pi over b is the period of a graph. Okay, so if b is 1, your period is 2 pi, right? Which makes sense because that's a full circle. Okay, this language and this language are different, right? This is radian language, this is degree language. So sometimes we have to just look and say, are we talking in radians? Are we talking in degrees? So here you can see on this equation there was a -3 at the end. So what did that do to this graph? What's a -3 in this graph? The midline, it went down 3. That midline is down 3. Okay? Then the equation has a 5 in the front. So what is 5? That's 5, the amplitude. Okay? Then I have a 2 in this position, the B position. So what did the 2 do? It changed the period, is what it did. So here's what happened. 2 pi over b. And now if I do 2 pi over 2, I should have done that the other way. 2 pi over 2 2 pi over 2 means my period is only pi now. You see how I only moved a pi to get from this point to this point again, it only took me pi instead of 2 pi. So it changed that. Okay. So here, do you see all these things happening? So when I see a +1 at the end of this, that means what? This middle is at 1. I see a 4 in the front. Now that means the amplitude is 4. And I'm seeing a pi over 2. So if I do 2 pi over a pi over 2, what is my new period showing? So how do I divide this in math? I'm going to go 2 pi and times and flip. Is that okay with you? I times and flip fractions when I divide. And then this cancels. So the period is 4. Does that look like that's happening on the graph? Does it take me 4 to get through a cycle? So if I start here, where do I get to that point again? So high, mid, low, back to the mid. Hey, look, it took me 4 to get there. Okay? You don't have to necessarily look at that point. You can look at the top and top. How far is this max from this max? From a 1 to a 5. They're 4 apart from each other. Okay? That's what that's talking about. Okay, so that's a recap of what's going on. Let's talk about how to match some graphs here. So there's 5 graphs, and I put something like this on your test. Okay, let's look for B and E, because they're both +3, amplitude of 2. Okay, where do you see a +3 midline? Which 2 graphs are our options here? I need a +3 midline. I need a midline at 3, and then an amplitude of 2. Which 2 graphs could I pick from on those? +3. So these ones, are you looking at those 2? Okay, now here's the difference. This one has a B value, which changes the period. This one doesn't have a B value, so the period should be what? What's the normal period? What's the normal cycle of a circle? 2 pi or 360, depending on what's written. So this one has a normal period, this one won't. So B and E, which one is which? So let's talk about this period goes from here to here. This period goes from here to here. So which one is going to match which equation? So this one is B, because it's just the normal period. It took 2 pi. And this one will have to be E, because my period is now just 1 pi instead of 2 pi. Okay, now let's look at the rest. They all have a midline of -1, so I can't compare anything there. Which one stands out as different between these 3 equations? Which one is standing out to you as different right now? D? Okay, I'm going to go with A as different. Because these both have 4s in the front? these both have 4s in the front and they both have -1 at the back. So which one is just 2 amplitude? So it has to have a middle at -1 and an amplitude of 2. Which one does that? The one next to the B? Yeah. Do you see this? They all have the -1 right in the middle, but this one has an amplitude of 2. So this one is A. Okay, what's the difference between these two now? These are the ones left. They both have the 4, they both have the -1. So midline, amplitude are the same. This one has a period of 2 pi because it's normal. This one will have a different period, right? Because it's got something that changes the period. So I'm left with these top two. So this one has a normal period to it. It went from a midpoint to that midpoint. It took 2 pi. This one, the period is what actually on this one? What's the period on this one? It should be 8. So it got changed. So this one is going to be D. What do I forget my letters here? C. Okay. So I have that question on your test. I think I put 6 graphs, 6 equations. Figure out what's what. Okay. Number 2, we have to get the info about it. So I'm going to start labeling some things. So I'm going to go like that because -1 is the highest height. And I'm going to go like that because -5 is the lowest height. And do you know which value would be halfway between them? -3 is halfway between them. So I kind of do this because it helps me get all my numbers. So I kind of do this on the side. How much spacing is there in that zone then? 2. Okay, so let's answer the questions. The range is, what's the lowest to the highest? Midline. So we wrote it, or I already wrote it, y equals. So the -3 is in the middle. Amplitude, we had a 2. And the period, we have to find that. So what do we want to use as our starting point? I think I'd have to go with this coordinate because I can't really start there. That's awkward for me. And the next time I see that coordinate is there. That's from coordinate to the same coordinate. You don't have to pick on the y-axis. You have to pick a coordinate to the next time you see that coordinate. How much space? Okay, it's not what's the x value. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm just saying what's the space? 6. They're 6 apart. Okay, now I gave you an equation, and you're going to have to figure this all out with an equation instead of a graph. Okay, do you remember what each thing does in an equation? This changes our amplitude. This value in the middle here will change our period, and that would change our mid. Okay, you gotta have those three things down. Okay, so I'm gonna give myself a little bit of a note like I did last time. So y equals -5 is in the middle. And I go like that, and I say I have to have an amplitude of 6. So now, what's the bottom height? If I have to go 6 down from that. -11 you'd be reaching down to, and what would you be reaching up to? +1. Okay, so do you see how I picked all that info? I didn't even graph it. I could graph it in my calculator, but I don't need to because I can just pick that out. Okay, so we have range -11 to 1. Are you also noting that those two range numbers are 12 apart from each other? That makes sense because the amplitude is 6. Mid. So that's that -5 part. Amplitude was 6. And the period, we're going to go to the sideline and do 2 pi over b equals period. So that's going to always be that little formula. Okay, so 2 pi over 2. So I have to divide it by the b number, so there was a 2 there. If you're okay, I'm just going to do that cross off. The 2 and the 2, they would cross off. So my period is now just a pi. It only takes a pi to go through a cycle instead of 2 pi. Or in degrees, it takes me 180 degrees instead of 360 degrees. Okay, let's do the same thing with another graph. So I just kind of write myself some notes here. So I'm going to say that's the top and bottom. Therefore, what's in the middle? Just 0, right? 0's in the middle. And now I'm going to make a note of how much spacing I have. Okay, so these ones seem to be maybe faster than we'll deal with the period after. So the range is -2 to 2. The middle is y equals 0, and the amplitude was 2. And what's the period? So, what do you want to do here? Do you want to take a top to a top? Is that okay? I can do different things here. If I take a top to a top, how much spacing is there? So this was at 60 and this is at 180. So that means that traveled how far apart from each other? 120, and now like this is in degrees. Okay? So sometimes I do things in radians, sometimes I do things in degrees. Given the midline of y equals 5, and the amplitude is 7, what's the range? Okay, so where do you get to if you go 7 down? Do you get to a -2? And if I go 7 up, 12. Okay, this time I gave you the range and you have to figure out the other stuff. So I gave you the low and I gave you the high. What number is directly in the middle of that? How do you do that? You can add them together and then divide by 2. Add together and divide by 2. Did you get 1? Is that what we're getting? Okay, so 1 is in the middle. So, how much space is there between 1 and 12? That should be 11 and 11. Okay, I also could have done this. These values on my range are 22 apart from each other. Okay, and now I know my amplitude is 11. If those are 22 apart, my amplitude is 11. Okay, this time I gave you a minimum and a maximum. So -4, -6 is a minimum, and then 214 is a maximum. So that's my visual. I'm a visual person, so that's, you don't have to draw, but I'm a visual. So I had a minimum, and then I went to the next maximum. Okay, we got to get all the things. Midline, amplitude. Okay, so this height was 14, and this height was -6. So those were the heights. That was at a -6 and that was at a 14, making what number in the middle of that? Did you come up with a number in the middle? 4? So from 4, that would make 4 plus 10 gets you to 14. 4 minus 10 would get you to the -6. So we have our midline, amplitude, range. Okay, period. Let's talk about the period of this. How much space, so horizontally, how much space is there in those 2 points? This was at -4 and now that's at 2. How much space is that zone? 6, okay? Looking at this, is this considered a full cycle? No, that is not a cycle. Do you see? It only goes from a bottom to a top. So if I wanted to do a cycle, I'd have to do bottom, mid, top, mid, back to the bottom. This would be a cycle. What's the relationship from this distance to this distance? What would I have to do? I need to double it. Do you see why I would double it? Because this is 2 jumps and another 2 jumps. So the period is 12. Okay, number 8. We have a midline at 8. We have a max value at 15. Our max value will hit a height of 15, which means the spacing for the amplitude will be 7, right? Okay, so do you remember what A, the B, and the D all mean? So this is amplitude, this talks about period, and this talks about mid. Okay, again, you have to know those 3 pieces. So I'm going to put a 7 here. I'm going to put a +8 here. And the period is always a thing you're just going to have to figure out. So 2 pi over some b will equal the period. I was told the period is pi. I was told that. So 2 pi over some b number I got to figure out will be pi. Okay, you can flip-flop the b and the pi around in the cross-multiply world. That's what would just happen. And that cancels, making the b number 2. And some of you might have done that in your head because normal's 2 pi. What did I divide by to end up with pi? Okay, I gave you a minimum point and an amplitude. So you need the range. So what I gave you was that the lowest height is -7. That's what I gave you. And I gave you an amplitude of 10. So that's the idea. So I want the range, which means I need to figure out what that highest value will end up being. So are you okay to understand I'm going to end up going up 20 to get there, right? Or you can go 10, get midline, and then another 10. That's fine. So what is -7 plus 20? So that should be 13, right? Okay, filling in a chart. So this is talking about that pattern. So when I talk about a pattern, mid, high, mid, low, mid, high, mid, low, mid, high, mid, low, okay? What should we label this? Would this be a middle value, a high value, or a low value? -12. out of these three numbers that you see, what is negative 12? Would it be a high, a middle, or a low? It'd be a low. Negative 12 is the lowest I would see. And then this means I'm going to a middle. And then this is a high. And then this would be a middle. So what would come next in this chart? Low, middle, high, middle, low, and then I'd have to go back to a middle. Okay, so I put one of those on your test, so it's all about just following that pattern. Okay, we have a gymnast doing some jumps, and this is the equation. So we have height in feet and time in seconds. What is the max height the gymnast goes? What is the max height? So I'm actually not even going to use my calculator. What is the representation of that and that? What do those things even mean? So 9.8 is my middle. So I'm taking this equation, 9.8 is my middle. 11.5 is my amplitude. So what I'm trying to figure out is the max height. So what do you eventually get to up there? Can you figure that number out? That's what I would do. .3 feet. So that's how I would answer A. If you wanted to, obviously you could put that into your calculator and do a maximum, left bound, right bound. You can do that as well. That would work. How often does the gymnast jump? So this is talking about a cycle. What's one complete cycle? So we need our period. We need our period. So I'm going to put in the B value. So the B value was that. Okay, instead of doing a divide fraction, can you change that to look like a multiply flip fraction? Because that's what I would do with a fraction. So that's what I'm going to turn this into. Okay, that's okay. Multiply and flip a fraction. And what happens to those pi's? So 4 seconds to get through a cycle. So for this gymnast, every 4 seconds, she's doing another jump. Every 4 seconds, the pattern continues. Okay, a scientist is measuring the depth of the water. At the high tide, the depth is 8 feet. At the low tide, 6.2 hours later, the depth is 5 feet. Create a table of values and then calculate a sine regression. Okay, so we need the time and the depth. so here's what's going to happen. At the start, I have a depth of 8. Don't go on from there yet. I'm going to explain something. At the start, our depth is 8. That is the high tide. So I'm going to put high. Where do you have to go on a sine curve after you're on a top point? You're now going to need to go to a middle, then a low, then a middle, then a back to a high, and it would start repeating and repeating again. Okay, does that make sense? High, middle, low, middle, high. Gotta keep following that pattern. There's always 5 to make that pattern. There was a low tide 6.2 hours later at 5 feet. Okay, did you see that I had to skip right now into my chart? Okay, can somebody, just mental math, tell me what value of time would be here? Did you get 3.1? Can you figure out the time there and there? What are you doing every time? You're going to have to add 3.1. Add 3.1 now. Every maneuver, you're adding 3.1. Okay, does that make sense how I got that? Is that okay? Okay, so 8 is high, 5 is low. What's the tide in the middle then? What number would be in the middle of that? 6.5. So this would also be a 6.5, and this would be an 8. Okay, it just fluctuates between those 3. It just goes. Okay, you ready? Let's try doing our calculator stuff that we've been doing. Stat edit clear. Okay, can you put your table in there? Okay, y equals, I gotta get some stuff out. Activate your plot. You know what, we need to check. I gotta go to my mode here. You are gonna have to be in radian mode. Remember yesterday we talked about you could be in degrees or radians? You're gonna have to be in radian mode when you're doing these stat edits, okay? Zoom 9. Zoom 9. So there's the tide of the water. It's up, it goes down, comes back up, right? Stat, calculate. These are all the same steps. Stat, calculate, all the way at the bottom. So I actually put my arrow up, because when you put your arrow up, it goes to the bottom of the list. Sine regression. So it's the C, enter. And you get yourself an equation. Okay, same steps. Y equals vars, copy and paste it in there. These are all the same maneuvers as our other 2 units. Copy and paste it with the vars button in your Y screen. Okay, that's what's going on with the tide. Okay, now I'm going to deactivate. Okay, I deactivated my plot. Question C. What will the depth of the water be at 4 hours? So 4 hours is just an X value, so how do I do that? Trace 4. Trace 4, and I get 5.84 feet. Okay. Question D. How long will it take for the tide to complete a full cycle? Okay. Let's go like this. This is how I'll teach you how to do it. I'm going to go trace 0. Okay. So I'm at 8. Are you okay to understand? I'm trying to figure out from the time 0 to the time of the next max. So I'm at a max. I got to get myself over to the next max. So I'm going to second calculate a max, and I got to move way over there. I'm actually going to jump with my mouse here.
Isn't the answer on the table?
Yeah, it is. I'm also going to talk about that. So the time is 12.4. So that's how long it took, which we've also activated on our table. The next time to go from an 8 to an 8 was that 12.4 hours passed, okay? Okay, question E. During the first 18 hours, how many hours will the tide be above 7 feet? Okay, so I'm going to move my window to have a, let's go 20. Okay, so that's what I see in my window when I went up to 20, because it says during the first 18 hours. So I need to make sure 18 hours are showing. So I have 2 tide that go up and down like that. So I want to be above 7 feet deep. So 7 feet. I want to be above that. So this is the tides that are above that. Does that make sense? I'm going to do a Y2. I need these intersections. So obviously from 0, and then I need the intersection, intersection, intersection. Can you work in your calculator to get me those 3 intersections? Okay, the question says, how much time will it spend there? So from here to here was 2.43 seconds. How much time is between that? So you need to subtract those numbers. subtract them. So 4.86 hours there, 2.43 hours in that. So how much time altogether? Okay, so I like that question. It was a little bit of problem solving skills. You have to understand what's happening. Okay, so that's the visual of the tide being over 7. Okay, I'm going to jump a couple questions. Let's go to number 15. Lena's playing an accordion. Do we know what an accordion looks like? It's like that thing you put on and then you squish in and out. Remember that instrument? Okay, so we have the length of the accordion and what else we got? Length and seconds. How much will the accordion move in length from going out to in? Okay, so let's talk about these numbers. Okay, so 65 is in the middle. $25 means we're going to be going in and out 25 from that. So can you get me those values, both of them? So the compression of the accordion is that it's 40, and when you extend the accordion, now you're 90 out. So how much length will it go from all the way out to all the way in? How much length passes by? 50 centimeters. Okay? Some of you might have just said, ooh, amplitude is 25, double it. Some of you might have just thought of that too, right? How long does it take to move from out to in? Okay, so we are going to do the 2 pi over b. 2 pi over b is going to be a period. So 2 pi, and the b number, that's the b number, is pi. So the period of this is 2 seconds. The period of this is 2 seconds. Okay. The answer to B is not 2 seconds. Why is it not 2 seconds to that question? Think about why moving out to in is not just 2 seconds. What do I have to change? It's half. Because when you move out, this is out to in. Is that a full cycle? Nope. This is a half of a cycle. So just doing that should take you 1 second. Just doing that should only take you 1 second. Okay? Okay, I think we're going to quickly do the next page, and then I have to stop talking because this is an hour long already. Okay, estimate to the nearest radian the measure of this. Okay. Any guesses? What do you think? What do you want to do here? Do you want to talk about degrees and then convert it? We can do that. How many degrees does your brain say that is? 270 is 3/4 of a circle, right? So I might just be a little bit more than that, right? We're a little bit more. Should we just do like 275 degrees? That's my just my brain saying that's an estimate. How do you convert to radians? Do you remember that? So that many degrees is how many radians when you know what? What is the thing you know? Do you remember what you know? How many degrees? 180 degrees is exactly 1 pi radian. So this is an estimate. 4.8. So our best is C. Convert this radian to degrees. So I'm going to set that up. So that many radians is how many degrees? And then make your ratio match. So now I know pi is equal to 180. Do you see how I am matching my t-shirts and pants on my ratio? And then cross multiplying is what you're going to need to do. Okay, same for question 18. Can you try to set that one and solve it on your own? Set up your own ratio there. Once you have your ratio set up, then say, what am I going to times and divide with cross multiply? Okay, we're good? 5.85. Okay, 2 more quick ones and then we're done. Estimate a radian. Okay, so what does this swiveling mean? It means you're traveling a full circle and then plus. So this person has traveled 360 and then how many more would you say? I'm thinking like an 80. Should we just go like 80? So your estimations, you're probably better to estimate in degrees with your brain because that's what you know. And then let's see what we're going to get closest to. If we just say if that's 440, do we get something to kind of be close because we just estimated? And the last question, just do this in degrees. So how many degrees is this? So just remember on a circle, 180 looks like that. Okay, I should be less than 180. So just picking a guess, that's, I don't know, somewhere in a ballpark. 135, 140, 145.